Well, it looks like we're ready for round number one. Chris Pikula versus Bob Maher. So we will pull up Magic Online and see how that match is starting to come together.
All right.
Yeah, Chris is on a Esper Rare Bears deck. It's essentially a homebrew, blue, white, red. A decent set of creatures, decent set of control elements. Bob Maher, meanwhile, on a Grixis control deck. Both players, hilariously, awesomely, featuring 4 copies of Dark Confidant in their deck, giving us the maximum possible 9 in this matchup.
I have to
and a Meddling Mage.
I have to feel bad for Chris here because Bob doesn't have any copies of Meddling Mage in his deck.
That is true. Just trying to make sure we get our hand cams. I know that we're hoping to try to get to these matches a little sooner than we have historically so that we can show you guys the mulligan decisions. That's often one of the most interesting parts of a vintage match.
Ooh, looks like we have a good mulligan here for Chris, and it looks like we do not have a mulligan here for Bob.
Yeah, easy decision for Chris, right? He's just got no ability to cast anything.
No mana, no.
Bob's draw is pretty solid, right? I mean, he can Ancestral.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a Snapcaster. He's got a Trinket Mage. That draw is awesome.
He could have turn 1, yeah, Ancestral, Trinket Mage. He could even have both if he really wants. In fact, actually, he could have turn 1 Trinket Mage to get Lotus, Ancestral, and then he's 1 mana short of being able to snap back the Ancestral in the first turn.
All right, well, Chris's 6-card hand looks a little better. Yeah, only the 1 land, but it's got a Misstep and a Thoughtseize and a Spell Pierce.
Yeah, that actually matches up pretty well with what Bob's going to do, presumably.
Yeah, who's on the play? Is it Chris?
I can't tell.
Yeah, I can tell you. It's okay. Bob who's on the play first? All right. That is good news for Bob.
That's a bit of goose for him. Let's see how he plays this.
Yeah, do you just run out of Ancestral?
Well, he knows that Chris doesn't have Misdirection, and he also knows that Ancestral is going to get significantly worse once Spirit of the Labyrinth arrives. So I think in this matchup it makes sense. And in the worst case, he can snap it back next turn.
Yeah, and he's got to decide whether he wants to do it on his main phase in case he draws more gas, or whether he wants to wait for upkeep. If he does it main phase, there's some danger that he would have to discard, but it looks like he wants to play the Trinket Mage first.
All right. Well, so he chose not to play the Voltaic Key, and that would have walked into Mental Misstep. And I'm curious to see what he gets here.
Could easily be Black Lotus. Could also be, I mean, Mox Sapphire is not
Could be Mox Sapphire. It could be Sensei's Divining Top, right?
Could be. Sensei's Divining Top Voltaic Key is a nice combo.
It
is.
He's
got the mana to run it.
It'll also let him bait out the Mental Misstep.
Although he's not casting anything else this turn unless he gets mana with this Trinket Mage.
Right. But next turn, he could lead with the top, and if that survives Mental Misstep, the coast is probably clear for Ancestral. And again, on account of the Snapcaster Mage, yet another invitational card.
There he goes for the Divining Top.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Chris's Thoughtseize is pretty good here, though.
It is. It'll also let him know to save the Mental Misstep.
That is true. Or at least decide what he cares about with the Misstep. What do you take with the Thoughtseize here?
I think you have to take the Ancestral.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I agree with you. The fact that he has a Snapcaster makes it a little trickier. He can't snap back the top.
It means that Chris can decide between saving the Mental Misstep for the snapped back Ancestral or just hitting top on the way down.
But like, aren't you better off Thoughtseizing the Snapcaster and then misstepping the Ancestral? There's not a 2-1 randomly in play at the end of that.
I think that's going to be a function of how Chris wants the tempo of this to play out.
Yeah. It's a little greedy, my line. If you take the Snapcaster, you're relying on the fact that Bob's not going to draw a way to defend his Ancestral.
It's greedy. That doesn't make it wrong.
Yeah, and he goes for the Ancestral. It seems like the safer play.
It does.
But again, Chris is going to randomly... The Snapcaster is going to come down, and he can't actually stop that.
No, it's true. But I think that Chris's deck is reasonably prepared to
Oh,
deal with
jeez.
the 2-1. Wow.
That
That
was a
was a
card.
powerful draw for Bob.
He's got no black mana right now, but
Not
still.
yet. One of the other nice things about Top in this matchup is that it gets around Spirit of the Labyrinth, because even though you can't draw the extra cards, you can arrange them. And in the worst case, you can draw one card on the opponent's turn.
Right. Wow, so he missteps the Divining Top. I guess he knows that Snapcaster's probably not coming out.
Hmm.
No, and the Snapcaster comes out as a response, right? There was one colorless still floating.
So now Bob could draw a mental misstep.
Wow, he missteps the Divining Top into Snapcaster Ancestral.
And Bob drew the mental misstep. So
Jeez.
This will give him the chance to get the... Oh, wow. That was an unfortunate turn of events for Chris.
Definitely. Well, it is true that anyone who's rooting for the 8-way tie at the end of the regular season should be rooting for Bob.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? I'm rooting for the 8-way tie scenario. It's the only way I make the playoffs.
Well,
I think it's the only way I make the playoffs.
It looks like we have a mirror match going now.
Dark Confidant versus Bob Maher.
I do think that it's worth pointing out earlier that Chris got to see Bob's hand with Thoughtseize, and I've found that that's actually even more important when playing in this format rather than in real life, because you can't even try to read someone on here.
Sure.
Well, so Bob is less than halfway to being able to cast his Blightsteel Colossus. This gets him a little bit closer, though. So there's a good synergy between Sensei's Divining Top and Voltaic Key, which is that you can stack the draw with Sensei's Divining Top, untap it with Voltaic Key, and then do it again. And because you put the top atop your library on resolution rather than as part of the cost, both draw effects go in the stack. The first putting the top on top of the second actually drawing you the top.
Yeah, no, it's a nice little engine. It's effectively drawing an extra card every turn. Tinker, Scalding Tarn, Dark Confidant are the 3 cards he's looking at with the top right now. Tinker is less exciting when the Blightsteel's in his hand.
It does end the game, though, if it resolves. Because he can get Time Vault.
Oh, he can go get the Time Vault, of course. Yeah, who needs Blightsteel Colossus? Just go get the Time Vault.
Exactly.
Sounds like he set it up to draw the Bob and then the Tinker.
So he could have gone for it now, but that would work out badly if it gets countered. So it seems like he's trying to set it up, and it looks like he's ahead, so he's not as concerned about what's going to happen.
Yep. He also does have the Scalding Tarn in play, so he can reshuffle whenever he's done. Chris is just blocking with Dark Confidant. Is that what's going on? Okay, no blocks, sorry.
Okay. Once Dark Confidant starts blocking, it's not a particularly good sign.
Now, does Bob do the little draw an extra card trick?
He has a number of options here.
He does.
So this game, we've seen Bob just start way ahead. The early Ancestral was powerful, and the Mana Crypt put him
well, here's the trick.
Ahead.
So you guys see how he's doing the Sensei's Divining to activate Sensei's Divining Top. As it responds, untap it with Voltaic Key. He lets the key respond, then he activates Sensei's Divining Top to draw the top card again. So he'll wind up flipping the top for the top card, and then he'll wind up drawing an extra card, which will be getting the top back, which he can then replay. Or he can play the Dark Confidant, as he prefers.
I think it's probably better to play at the top here, because then, in the absolute worst-case scenario, he has a Force of Will online.
Because he can flip the top to get the Tinker.
Right.
Having a blue card to pitch to Force. Yeah, if he wants to play the Dark Confidant, he has to crack Scalding Tarn and shuffle away the Tinker, which seems awkward given that the Tinker is an instant win if it resolves.
It is.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think replay top and say go.
It would take a lot to make it worth pitching Tinker to Force of Will, but sometimes you just need to have that option.
Yep. Yeah, the trick to do that on Magic Online, by the way, you have to hold control in order to retain priority. If you want to respond to your own spell on Magic Online, you have to hold control down while you're casting the thing or activating the ability. Either way. All right. Chris is going to draw an extra card with Dark Confidant. He reveals a Mox Pearl. And then looks like Spirit of the Labyrinth. Was this his next draw?
Spirit himself, so...
What is Chris's play?
I think he plays the Spirit. No, it looks like he's tapping 3.
Trinket Mage. Go get Sapphire?
He could get Lotus, and Lotus would let him cast Vidillion Click.
Yeah, he either gets Sapphire to leave up Spell Pierce, but that's a little scary given how much mana Bob has.
No.
Or he can get a Lotus to sack to the Click.
I think if he's going to play the Trinket Mage, I like that, but I also think it's not an unreasonable play to leave up Spell Pierce.
Just play Spirit and leave up Pierce?
I think so. That also opens you up next turn to being able to use Click to basically build your own coercion.
Sure, you take a card, and he's not allowed to draw the extra card to replace it because of the Spirit.
All right, so he makes the slightly more aggressive play of casting Trinket Mage. It's worth pointing out that Trinket Mage is not an invitational card. It's a rare thing for Wizards so far in this match. It's the only one so far that hasn't been.
True. Snapcaster Mage is also an invitational card. Tiago Chan.
Right.
Chris now looking at his deck, deciding what to get with the Trinket Mage.
It might be top.
Really?
If Chris doesn't know...
Anna. Yeah, okay, Black Lotus.
I think Lotus is the best choice. Top would be trying to set up for a longer game, but there isn't going to be a longer game, barring some disruption here.
Right. I mean, even just the Dark Confidant makes it hard for there to be a much longer game. All right, he's going main phase Trinket Mage, while Bob is tapped down to just that Scalding Tarn. Interesting. Bob has to decide whether he wants to respond to this.
He wants it to resolve. Now,
yeah. It's not that bad.
Now, it's worth noting also that Bob has very cleverly hidden the Tinker atop his library.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. Did Chris target Bob? I assume?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There are arrows going toward Bob and away from Chris, so yes.
And Bob just, whatever. Chris is now tapped out. I mean, he does have 2 cards. Bob has to worry about Chris's cards being a Force of Will and a blue card. So he might not just go for Tinker. Then again, what's the worst thing that happens if he goes for Tinker and gets it forced? He can Yawg Moth's Will back next turn.
The worst thing that happens is that Bob loses the mana crypt, which will be dealing him a lot of damage.
Yeah, exactly.
Tinker is a particularly clean way to assemble Vault Key because it gets It gets rid of the mana crypt here.
Mm-hmm. What do you do with the click here if you're Chris?
That's difficult. I found that in general, it's usually correct just to take Yawgmoth's Will when given the option.
That's what I was thinking.
I know that I've made the choice not a few times in the past to take something other than Yawgmoth's Will, and that's generally been incorrect.
I mean, you could take nothing because the Yogg Will isn't currently exciting.
You could take nothing. Yawgmoth's Will. Oh, he takes.
He took Dark Confidant.
Wow. All right. All right. I guess he wants there to be one Dark Confidant on each side.
Now, if Bob can find a blue card, he can tinker with Force Backup. I forget what he put third down. He could actually crack this fetch land before going to his turn. He could spin the top on his own turn.
He could, and in the worst case, if it gets countered, he still has Yawgmoth's Will, so
yeah,
he could refire next turn.
Yeah, spin top, put a blue card on top. I don't know if we can see what he's looking at.
Well, I think that whether or not he finds a blue card here.
Yeah, Flusterstorm and 2 lands. He puts the Flusterstorm on top.
That card is eminently blue.
It is. All right, one last Mana Vault flip. I don't know how Bob can possibly lose from here. Yep. Tinker sacrificing the Mana Crypt.
Yeah.
Chris doesn't even have the Force of Will, and even if he had it, Bob was ready to force back.
Right.
Bob Maher, ladies and gentlemen.
There he goes, taking all the turns he wants.
And there's the concession. Wow. Grixis control looked pretty good there.
It sure did. It sure did. It had both card advantage and mana advantage against Chris, and it quickly assembled its contraption. A lot of what Chris's deck is trying to do is prevent contraptions from being assembled.
Yep.
He has tools that stop all that card draw that Bob did. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get those tools online until it was too late, and by the time he could have played that Spirit of the Labyrinth, Bob was so far ahead that it wouldn't have done him any good.
Yeah, the die roll was a pretty big deal that game. I mean, if Chris had been on the play, he would have been able to Thoughtseize, take the Ancestral before Snapcaster could come online, untap. I mean, he then would have drawn his Spirit of the Labyrinth.
Right.
It felt like the die roll was pretty important to the way that those two hands played out.
Yeah, it was. I think it was pretty important, and I think that the die roll, and certainly Bob had the better hand as well. So when you put those two factors together,
yep,
it didn't seem like Chris really could have dug out of it.
Yeah, and for those of you who might be a little bit new, the reason Chris just conceded, Time Vault plus Voltaic Key, every turn Bob can just tap his key to untap the Time Vault, take another turn. He gets all the rest of the turns, and eventually it doesn't even matter how he wins the game. He's got any number of different creatures he can summon and attack with. So pretty much in Vintage, whenever someone assembles Vault Key, the other guy just concedes.
Right. Now, it's worth noting that had Bob not sacrificed the Mana Crypt Tinker, he still could theoretically have lost to losing enough coin flips in a row.
Yeah, no, I should say, people generally concede to Time Vault Voltaic Key as long as that player doesn't have a Mana Crypt in play.
Exactly.
Or a Dark Confidant. You can also lose the Dark Confidant while taking all the turns.
That's true. Yeah, that would have been at any cost. But in this case, Chris had the Bob in play. So it's an extremely powerful 2-card combo. It's 4 mana, 2 cards, and it gives you all the turns you want.
It's actually, a lot of the decks this week are just trying to assemble Vault Key. I mean, all of those Angel City Vault decks, that's essentially all they're doing, is they're playing all the draw 7s they possibly can so that it can see as many cards as possible so that they can find the one-time Vault and the one Voltaic Key.
It is. It's an extremely clean win. 4 mana. I remember being a small child in the mid-90s, looking at Time Vault and Animate Artifact and Instill Energy, and wanting to build this deck. And for a very long time, you actually couldn't do this. For a while, Time Vault involved time counters, so you couldn't just untap it and get a free turn. You had to sink an entire turn into it.
Yeah, there was a point where one of the ways that R&D would control the mistakes that sometimes got printed was by issuing power level errata. They literally changed the way Time Vault worked so that it didn't work the way it looked like it worked from the printed card, but in fact you could only get the extra turn if you skipped a turn first. I think they correctly decided that was just a dumb way to manage the cards, and so they no longer do any power level errata. They, in fact, undid all the power level errata that had accumulated over the course of basically the late 90s.
And, all right.
Looks like we're about ready for game 2.
Good. Well, Time Vault was actually one of the holdouts. It had power level errata longer than some of the other cards.
Sure.
But I'm glad Wizards came around. So
yeah.
So it looks like Chris has the powerful combo of Spirit of the Labyrinth and Ancestral Recall.
I think there's a correct order for playing those.
So Chris has a very powerful hand, and
yeah, Bob's is fine.
Bob has a turn 2 Bob.
It's a little mana light, but yeah. I mean, you've got 2 lands and a turn 2 Confidant, so I think you keep it. He's got Force of Will and a pinch.
So I would definitely keep a little bit of mana acceleration. Drawing a Mox, for example, would make Bob's hand stellar, and he has Force of Will online.
Yeah, one of the real reasons Dark Confidant is so good is the fact that it's 1 and a black, so that any Mox allows you to play it on turn 1.
Right. Turn 1 Dark Confidant can set you up for the rest of the game. You no longer need to invest mana in accumulating cards. All you need to do is 1-for-1 your opponent, maintain parity, and then Dark Confidant will continue to ship you a steady supply of cards.
All right, Chris is going to go ahead and main phase this Ancestral. He knows he's not in any danger of discarding since he's got a Black Lotus in his hand.
Right.
And he might get something cool to do with the Black Lotus.
If you could somehow have gotten black, blue, and white mana all at once, you would have been able to lead to the Thoughtseize.
Well, if he draws the... he just needs to draw Dark Confidant. Then he can sack the Lotus for Thoughtseize plus Confidant, right? Bob thinking about whether to force this, and it looks like he's gonna. Wow, force discarding Tinker.
Well, sometimes your Ancestral's a hint of Torok.
That is an expensive Force of Will.
Chris can...
I don't know, do you force Ancestrals these days?
It depends on my hand. I think here it makes sense because Bob has a plan to get long-term card advantage.
That's a great point.
I really like this play here of playing the Spirit of the Labyrinth because he's going to stop, say, Bob if Bob had an Ancestral. Now, it turns out that Bob has Lightning Bolt, which is... It's from the same cycle as Ancestral, but it sees more play in Modern.
It's better here.
It actually is. It actually is. I don't remember if Bob has a Badlands in his deck.
I don't think he does. You're right. He totally wants to get a Badlands here. He wants to cast Dark Confidant and Lightning Bolt, and he doesn't have a land to go get that does that.
So this is actually a very tough decision. I think it makes sense to try to wait and play Dark Confidant. Because in theory, well, Dark Confidant accumulates a card every turn, but it's not actually drawing a card. It's actually revealing a card. Mm-hmm. Now this is an aggressive play.
Whoa!
Usually, you want to strip mine when you're at parity or when you have some sort of advantage. Here, Bob knows full well that the Spirit's going to attack him for 3.
Now I'm sure he's going to get the Volcanic for Lightning Bolt.
I think he'd also really like to draw a Mox up next.
Oh, geez. But Chris fetches out black mana, and now he can Thoughtseize away the Lightning Bolt. I assume you take the Lightning Bolt here, right? Seeing a hand with only 1 land.
Do you take the Bolt here, or do you take...
I'm not taking the Yawgmoth's Will when he's got 1 mana.
I mean, this is...
I'm not taking the Time Vault when he doesn't have the other half of the key, and again, only has 1 mana.
Yeah. All right, I'm sold on taking the Lightning Bolt here.
Yeah, and that's what he does. What a crazy sequence.
Lightning Bolt makes sense, especially when Chris has the second Spirit that he can play next turn.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting game.
Yeah, I think Bob, and it's hard to blame him for this, he saw Chris sink that Black Lotus into Spirit. You know, he had to believe Chris was Mana Light. He stopped the Ancestral. You know, Chris blew through his Lotus. Mm-hmm. Didn't have that many cards in hand.
It's
I don't know
also
though. I think you want turn 2 Dark Confidant.
oh, I would not have led with the strip mine there.
Yeah. I mean, I would have played the Strip Mine. I just wouldn't have used it.
I think I like leading with a fetch land. So
What if
unfortunate
Bob draws his
scenario
Strip Mine?
where Vidillion Click arrives, you can bolt the spirit in response.
Yeah, maybe. I'd be worried about Chris drawing a Strip Mine though. Does Chris play a Strip Mine?
Oh,
The reason to play the Strip Mine would be because you fear your opponent is going to play either a Wasteland or a Strip Mine, and then they won't use it and 2-for-1 themselves. So you'll definitely
no.
get to 2 mana. But if Chris
The
doesn't play any of that, we have face-up deck lists, and so my play
well,
only.
the fetch land would preclude that happening.
Yeah, I guess you're right. You're
It
right.
looks like Bob has decided to make a game of things by drawing a second land.
Good play.
That's a good thing to do.
What happened to Dark Confidant? What did I miss?
I don't know.
Oh, Swords of Plowshare.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right. Chris has decided that, once again, there will only be one other Bob on the other side of the table.
So far, the people who play Dark Confidant lose.
Well, that's not good news for Bob.
I just want to know what happens if Chris plays a Meddling Mage and names Dark Confidant. He should just win the game on the spot, right?
I think so. Yeah, it's definitely a flavor win.
All right. Well, Chris is smashing over with spirits. Bob is trying to draw anything relevant. Cracking that fetch land puts him at 6, which means the spirits are just lethal, right?
They are. It looks like Jace is going to arrive, and it's worth noting that Jace's brainstorm is significantly less effective when Spirit's on the table, so he has to bounce.
Yep. But then that also means the other spirit can just kill the Jace.
It could. It could just attack Bob. The second one could arrive, and then that sets up lethal no matter what Jace does for the next turn. What happened with the? Looks like there's a little bit of flag there. Okay. All right. So it looks like Bob's casting Trinket Mage.
What can he get? I mean, he can block.
Does he play Engineered Explosives?
Oh, he goes and gets the key, right?
Voltaic.
Bob's still going to win this?
Oh, wow.
That Trinket Mage off the top. He gets the key. He's been sitting on the vault the whole time. He gets to block Spirit of the Labyrinth.
Wow.
Not die. Caracas, Vendilion Click, Force of Will are the cards Chris sees with the top.
About to happen to him.
Wow. So the click is the saving grace, right?
But he can't cast it, can he?
Who, Chris?
Yeah.
He's got a fetch land. Doesn't he draw click? I think this is Bob's end step, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, Chris's main phase. My apologies.
So he won't be able to cast the click. Theoretically, had he a Lotus in play, he could pop the top to draw a card, but it looks like Bob has managed to steal victory here.
So close. Chris has got him down to 3. Chris has got the Vendilion Click in his hand that could bust up the Vault Key combo. And none of it's going to quite work out.
No. This is what we were talking about with Vault Key. It's extremely powerful, and it's not a lot of mana. Heck, Tendrils asked you to cast 9 spells before you cast it for the same amount of mana.
Sure. Wow, I mean, Chris attacks? It doesn't even matter. I don't even know if he attacks. I guess if he's got the click in his hand, I guess it just depends whether he wants to leave the spirit in play. But
looks like he's doesn't try to find something else.
Oh, okay. That's not bad. Not that he has much mana, but he knew he didn't want any of those.
Right. I don't know if there's anything he could draw. Does he have Spell Snare in his deck?
I could look that up.
Oh, he has Spell Pierce. Okay, he could draw Spell. So he could pass to Bob's turn, and then tap to draw a card.
Just a blind card off the top?
And if it's Spell Pierce, he can buy a free turn.
Yeah, hilariously, Bob can pay for the Spell Pierce, but doesn't have the 1 mana left over to activate the Voltaic Key.
Right.
So land off the top actually beats this line. But what are you going to do? I think Chris saw that Voltaic Key. Did Chris see that? Chris saw the Time Vault way back when, right? This was the Thoughtseize game, and he had the Time Vault back at the time.
He did. So he
this is not like Chris can cross his fingers and hope there's no Time Vault in Bob's hand. He knows it's there. He knows
it's time for a vault.
Desperately digging with Divining Top, well aware of exactly what's about to happen to him.
So, yeah, he's probably thinking whether it's worth shuffling and looking. But I don't think there's anything in his deck that costs no mana that could.
He's actually got a Steel Sabotage.
Right, but that costs 1 mana. So the blind popping the top to draw a card gives him a few theoretical options.
Yep. Wow. You know what else this means? 8-way tie, still live.
Getting a bit closer to that 8-way tie.
Yes. We'll only have 9 matches left that have to go perfect instead of 10. Hey, you laugh, but it was 15 matches when I first figured it out. Bob draws a Brainstorm?
Right. I don't think he wants just to play around Spell Pierce.
Yep. All right. Time Vaults. Chris sacks. Shuffles.
Right.
He's just got to
one land out of the deck,
his top
slightly
card to
increasing
break
his
this
odds
up.
of drawing something that will disrupt this. And then I think it just has to be a blind flip. Yep, here it goes.
Engineered Explosives.
Not quite what he needed.
Close. Main phase with enough mana, that would have worked.
It's true, but he couldn't have done that main phase because of Spirit. And the contraption's been assembled again.
Steam Flogger Boss would be proud.
I think he would be. I think Chris had theoretical outs, but
yeah, he played it right.
Absolutely. No, that was a good match.
Yeah, that was fun. So Bob Maher moves to 3-5, gets himself out of last place by half a game. He's now a half game ahead of both Raptor and I, Josh Utter-Layton and I. Chris falls to 4-4, which he's on a bit of a losing streak now. He was 3-0, and then loss, win, loss. So no longer in a playoff position. I think if he wins his last round, like I said, I think 5-4 is likely to make the playoffs, and 4-5 is still mathematically alive. But he's feeling a little better a month ago, I think. We'll get to put the real test, though, to the Pikula salt factor. Now, Pikula's the kind of guy who he's such a great storyteller, and he's often the subject of his own funny stories. He tells a great story about losing. We'll see. He's due up for commentary now, so.
Unfortunately, I'll have to watch that on the replay.
Right, and meanwhile, you got to go play.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, your match against LSV is up. It will be Dig Through Time versus Treasure Cruise. The fate of this Khans of Tarkir debate is riding on your match. And Josh's match against Tom and a million other matches that will take place over the course of the next month.
Well, yeah, the first of many.
First of many, there you go. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll take a brief break, and we'll set up for round number 2. Stay tuned.